2022 was a year. Now, it's debatable whether or not 2022 was a better or worse year than the last year or two, but it was nonetheless yet another painful year marching toward the slow entropic end of humanity itself. One of the few saving graces during the slow spiraling descent into unfathomable despair, other than your mom's bosom that is the sweet reprieve of video games. Here's a look at the games that helped me salvage the last vestiges of my crumbling sanity during 2022. Not all of these games came out in 2022. As a matter of fact, some of these games are pretty old, but these are the games that I played this year in no particular order or importance. I've made videos with a more thorough exploration of many of the games on this list, and those videos will be linked in the description below. Also, while I'm going to try to keep fairly general while I speak about these games, consider this your spoiler warning for pretty much the entire list, because I may dive into a couple of these on a bit deeper of a level just to explain why this game is so important and why it's worth playing. And most of these games are special enough that they should be played blind if you haven't already gotten around to playing them. Go play these games. Almost all of these games, with very few exceptions, are bangers, and you should definitely give them a try. Prey is hands down the best immersive sim game ever made. Prey takes place on a space station overrun by a hostile alien species called the Typhon that take on a variety of forms. The most noticeable of which is a mimic that, well, mimics the form of any object in the immediate environment. There's an unsettling tension that comes with this, a sort of creeping dread that at any time during your journey throughout the space station, there may be a mimic hiding in plain sight, ready to attack and catch you unaware. This tense atmosphere melds well with fantastic world building, plentiful lore, and strong environmental storytelling that adds depth and builds gradually to one of the best twist endings in all of gaming. I'm talking M. Night Shyamalan levels of twist, and back when M. Night Shyamalan twists were actually good and not just a meme. The final 5 minutes and the way that it completely recontextualizes everything that comes before that in Prey is something that takes the game to an entirely new level of amazing and well worth playing for that reveal alone. The big twists and reveals of the game combined with some fantastic gameplay that allows the player to make so many choices about how they approach each challenge and situation, using everything from specific skills, weapons and gadgets, and various aspects of the environment itself, make Prey a must-play for anyone who enjoys immersive sims, or simply games that allow players a wide range of choice when it comes to gameplay and problem solving, as well as choices that affect the outcome of the game itself. The immersive sim genre has been steadily growing in popularity, with a number of quality, well-made games on offer to challenge gamers to play their way and discover their own way forward through a variety of richly imagined worlds. Amongst all of them, Prey wears the crown for just how detailed and richly imagined its world is, and for just how many twists and turns gamers find themselves going through on their way to one of the best unexpected twist endings of all. How do I say something about the Outer Wilds that hasn't already been said? If you have any appreciation for games as an art form or a vehicle to allow players to explore unique experiences and ideas, if you have even the bare minimum of respect for how games are designed and put together, then I don't see how you cannot have at least some amount of appreciation for what Mobius Games did with The Outer Wilds. Despite a growing fan base that, like me, consider The Outer Wilds to be one of the best games ever made, I still consider the game to be enormously underrated and underappreciated for just how original and amazing it is. Breaking down the intricacies of what makes The Outer Wilds so spectacular would take up its own entire video. Beyond that, it's well understood among the fans of The Outer Wilds that to divulge anything beyond the very barest of knowledge is to completely spoil the game. The Outer Wilds fundamentally operates on the player's knowledge and understanding of the game, its rules, and the answers to its many mysteries, and once you understand these things, you have the keys to the entire game. The Outer Wilds has a simple, clean, compelling art design with a wealth of visual spectacles and eye-catching creative moments. The music is deeply evocative of the entire mood and vibe of The Outer Wilds and is written and composed in a way that directly ties to many of the themes of the game, kicking up at the perfect moment to set the mood and tone of what is happening in the game and bringing many an important moment to life. Perhaps one of the most impressive aspects of this masterpiece is the level of thought and detail that went into the adventure throughout this solar system and how every aspect, every layer, from the placement of the worlds to the laws of the universe, even down to how space and time function and affect not only your character but everything around you in various ways. It's all meticulous, thoughtful, and purposeful in a way that I cannot remember any other game matching. Of all of the games that I played this year, I don't think any of them stuck in my head quite as meaningfully as The Outer Wilds. I played it months ago, and I'm still thinking about it. I still look up videos on it. I still itch to explore it, and I still yearn to write about it. And I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon. And I can't think of any higher praise for a game than that. Subnautica is a horror game and you will never convince me otherwise. Sure, it's technically not. Set on an alien world that is mostly but not entirely oceanic, there's plenty of peaceful, serene, colorful even regions of the ocean where your silent protagonist crash lands, and he and thereby we, the player, get to explore and discover all of these different areas on our quest to find a way to get off the planet. You must survive the wet wilds of this planet by scavenging for resources and building water bases, vehicles, tools, and more. All while contending with the wildlife of this planet, which grows increasingly strange and, well, just grows. It grows massive and it grows hostile the further into the ocean you go, diving ever deeper into the many biomes of the depths and exploring a watery world that grows darker, deeper, and ever more oppressive the further you venture out. Subnautica is not really a horror game, but it absolutely is. And you don't have to have my personal aversion to deep sea oceans in order to feel that way, but it does help. Subnautica is the flagship survival crafting game. It's literally the best of the entire genre, and for two reasons. The world it's set in is infinitely more interesting than the survival crafting elements themselves, and in almost every way, the world takes precedence over survival and crafting, letting you soak in the spectacles and experiences of the ocean and the strange sights and life forms within it at your leisure. You aren't so tied down by survival and crafting that the wealth of rich sights and experiences in the game fade into the background. Secondly, Subnautica has a well-written, fleshed-out story to accompany its survival-based gameplay, with big, meaningful events concrete but discovery-driven goals and objectives to drive the plot along, as well as a wealth of lore and background information to enrich the plentiful world building. The unfolding plot and discoveries you uncover as you delve into the depths of Subnautica are the sort that really define the experience, and they pulled together so well that with every new layer of discovery you immediately want to dive even deeper into the unnerving darkness at the bottom of the sea to find more, even if it brings you closer to the ever-present threat of what lurks in the deep. In a game genre that is oversaturated to bursting, Subnautica is the king of the crafters, a titanic leviathan among a sea of simple little fish. It's no secret at all that I have a deep, abiding love for all things Dark Souls and FromSoft. I mention Dark Souls on almost every video I make because that's the level of impact it has had on my gaming psyche. And judging by just about every video essay that you can find relating to gaming, I'm kinda not the only one. So to say that I awaited this year and the chance to finally get to play Elden Ring, the new magnum opus from FromSoft, big Dark Souls itself, with the anticipation of the devoutly religious waiting for a messiah figure, or some kind of junkie waiting for his next hit of some sort of illicit substance, would be a little bit of an understatement. Elden Ring really only had to deliver on its original promise, big Dark Souls. That was really all players expected and all they really needed. What we got was Dark Souls extrapolated into possibly the most well-designed open world game experience I've ever gotten to play. Elden Ring understood one key concept that seemingly the entire game industry has forgotten when it comes to a central driving force of good open world gameplay design: the importance of player-driven discovery. Not since Skyrim have I played an open world game that was so intriguing, open, and compelling, calling me to explore every single crack and crevice of its world in search of answers, mysteries, and secrets. Elden Ring leaves it to the player and their curiosity to find the multitude of treasures, both literal and metaphorical, that it has to offer. FromSoft has long understood the importance of player discovery in gaming, and this has been refined and extrapolated from the relatively confined Dark Souls to the full-on sprawling open world of Elden Ring. And the power of being able to explore and investigate the wide world on my own terms, in my own way, with hardly anything to lead me forward or direct me this way or that, was both thrilling and daunting in all the right ways. Because it's the first open world game FromSoft has made, and because of how spectacularly executed it is, the open world is of course the element that is most noticeable for most people, especially FromSoft fans. But equally as important are all the other elements that come together to make Elden Ring an absolute top-tier experience. From the banger soundtrack that brings a whole new level of hype to the game, particularly during boss battles, compelling non-linear storytelling and immense complex lore, to the expansive, varied art design that tackles everything from high fantasy to body horror. all while keeping it appropriately in universe and thoughtfully integrated to the lore of Elden Ring. And of course, the lifeblood of any FromSoft game, the gameplay. The gameplay of Elden Ring is, as with most FromSoft games, challenging, punishing, but 100% masterable for those patient and determined enough to figure out how it works. There are difficulty debates abound about Elden Ring, just as there have been for every FromSoft game released pretty much ever. But Elden Ring provides so many options and solutions for its fights and encounters that allow players of almost every level, from beginner to absolute expert, to tailor their approach and experience in the game to fit the ability and how much of a challenge they want. From build variety, summon spirits, ashes of war, spells, and an expansive selection of equipment offering literally hundreds of pieces of armor and weaponry, not to mention more consumable items and offensive options than any FromSoft game before, and the option for co-op play, Elden Ring embraces a wider variety of approaches to combat and warfare than any previous title in its catalog. Like any game, I can find something to nitpick and point out as an imperfection in Elden Ring. But given the grand scope of it, the size of its ambition, and how much of its core elements were new directions for FromSoft, the game is undeniably a masterpiece. It delivers and then some in nearly every area, and with the same quality attention to detail and uncompromising creative spirit that FromSoft has built a rock-solid reputation upon, Elden Ring didn't have to be flawless. It's a juggernaut, an absolute badass of gaming, and an innovation of open world design, and it's going to be a while before anyone comes close to what it's accomplished. Soma may be the most cerebral, thought-provoking, and honestly horrifying horror game that I've ever played. While it isn't the most graphically dazzling of games, nor is its gameplay going to break any particular ground, and even many of its horror elements aren't shocking or awe-inspiring, it's the concepts, the ideas, the questions that Soma asks that make it stand out so distinctly in an otherwise flooded horror market. Not content to focus on one genre of horror alone, Soma covers several bases and covers them well. Everything from the standard startle and scare-based hiding and running from something sinister chasing after you, to twisted and uncomfortable body horror, to environmental horror ranging from the cramped, creepy, dark, and dilapidated halls of Pathos 2, to the haunting void of the deep ocean floor. Hello, Thalassophobia once again. But the most profound horror, the one Soma explores most effectively and is central to the game's plot and its direct terror, is psychological and existential horror. It's almost impossible to look at these elements of the game without majorly spoiling them. Soma's another of several games on this list that have so much of the effectiveness of the game lying in discovering the secrets it holds. Soma explores some few central questions, such as what does it mean to be human, and what significance the connection between body, mind, and consciousness hold. It explores these questions and ideas with thorough, frightful patience. One of the things I love the most about Soma is, at least in regards to its psychological horror, it doesn't shove the scary bits in your face. Instead, it introduces the above questions and concepts of what existence is and lets the player really mull over the ways in which these have the potential to horrify and disturb. I've played plenty of horror games, but I honestly struggle to recall many that got into my head as thoroughly as Soma based on such simple questions questions and ideas related to the nature of existence and humanity alone. Soma is the adventure of someone not quite human at the end of the world, working towards preserving something that might already be lost. And it asks you to figure out, what next? And what if there isn't anything next? And if there is, but it's not the life we know and recognize, is it even worth preserving? These seemingly vague and disjointed questions came together in a way that stirred deep discomfort in me, and even now, I don't know that I have answers to any of the difficult and horrific questions that Soma poses. And I think that's the magic of this game, and why I and many other players will never be able to entirely put it out of our minds. I played both Hotline Miami 1 and 2 for the first time back-to-back this year. Once I dove into the ultra-violent, psychedelic 80s themed slaughterfest with its blood-soaked neon, cheap suits, and ever-present top-tier soundtrack, I wasn't able to put it down for a moment. As soon as I finished the first, I launched immediately into the second with nothing but a craving for more. While there are definitely differences between Hotline Miami 1 and 2, and I think it's a pretty firm argument that most people could make that the second one is the superior of the two, Hotline Miami 1 is absolutely a thrill to play, and it does an excellent job of setting the stage for Hotline Miami 2, but also to clearly show the escalation in terms of quality, depth, and the refinement of design that went into Hotline Miami 2. Hotline Miami is a violent delight first and foremost, a cathartic embrace of all action all the time, with violence taking center stage as you run, gun, slice, and dice your way through stages from a top-down perspective through hordes of Russian mafiosa set to the driving synth beats. Combat is full throttle and punishing as both you and your enemies die in one shot or cut or bash 99% of the time. Every stage is broken into 2 or 3 segments, and the only way you can progress is by killing all opposition on a floor or wing of the building you find yourself in before advancing to a new area. The action is frenetic and relentless, though you can slow things down a small bit by playing strategically, lining up shots around corners and walls, and diving behind cover before lining up your next attack as another enemy investigates the noises of your violent rampage. Or you can simply go all out, diving into the fray and using precision and fast twitch reflexes to work your carnage. Knowledge of enemy placement and creative approaches to each encounter and how to take all your enemies out before they can take you down is crucial. And while a head-on approach is possible, the game has zero forgiveness and will put you down faster than you even realize an enemy is there sometimes. Hotline Miami spares no feelings. You will die and die and die again until you know the ins and outs of every enemy coming your way and devise a strategy or acceptable method for dealing with every threat stalking you down. Luckily, Hotline Miami resets after every death, allowing you to get back into the carnage with no load time or retreading unnecessary grounds to get back into the action. The pacing of doing violence, rinsing, and repeating is perfect, as is the brief interludes for narrative and story beats between each level. There is a story and plot to Hotline Miami, though it is stronger in the sequel than in the original. While the narrative is told in a non-linear and sometimes cryptic way, it's an intriguing exploration of themes of death, violence, desensitization, radicalization, and the nature of people escalating. Or just simple violence for violence sake, who's to say? There's there's room for interpretation, so theorize away. Whether you explore the nuance of possible plot and meaning or not, the gameplay of Hotline Miami is second to none. An absolute thrill and joyride of bloodshed and madness. The type of over-the-top slayfest that makes you feel twitchy and a little unhinged as you lay waste to all the unfortunate souls unlucky enough to be in the wrong place when you roll through. Hotline Miami's gameplay, look, and design are so satisfying it's even launched a sort of subgenre of games that are perhaps not identical in design or features, but nevertheless draw massive inspiration from the berserk rampage of adrenaline, blood, and bullets that Hotline Miami became synonymous for. Alright, let's be honest. Comparing games to Dark Souls at this point is a meme. Ignore the part where I did that earlier, don't worry about it. Anyways, I do love me some memes, so what the hell? Hollow Knight is the Dark Souls of 2D side-scroller platform hop-and-scotch games with bugs. But honestly, probably not even in the way that you think. I could see some people saying, hey, it's kind of like Dark Souls because it has a similar death mechanic where if you die, you get one chance to go retrieve your currency from your dead corpse so that you can upgrade further or lose it all and have to scrounge your resources all over again. Or maybe because of its system of checkpoints that you have to unlock as you explore a vast dead kingdom. Very similar to the bonfire system, if only bonfires and benches had anything in common. You can sit on both of them, I guess, but one of them is going to be way more comfortable than the other. I'm not going to tell you which though. Both games are difficult, I guess, or perhaps the focus on spectacular over-the-top boss fights. Or maybe, like Dark Souls, the fact that we are exploring long-dead ancient kingdoms, sifting through the crumbling remains of a grander, far more powerful ancient civilization that has been lost to the ravages of time. As we, everyone, and everything around us are slowly dragged step by weakening step toward the darkness of oblivion. And we are all held captive by the literal and metaphorical finite nature of all things that have ever been. The unavoidable reality that the end comes for us all. Yeah, all that is totally true, but the way Hollow Knight most reminds me of Dark Souls is in the joy and anticipation I felt of exploring the unknown. Hollow Knight has a shockingly huge map to explore for a 2D platformer Metroidvania Souls-like thing, and it is rife with secrets, shortcuts, hidden areas, unlockables, characters, enemies, challenges, collectibles, lore, and damn near anything interesting and worth looking at that you can think of. Hollow Knight handles map use and navigation masterfully, allowing you to unlock segments of your map for each new zone you find, but leaving enough off the map and unseen to incentivize some real curiosity in exploring every nook and cranny for secrets. This was the primary appeal for me. I could not get enough of exploring Hallownest and trying to find every scrap of lore, every hidden character, every power-up and ability, or just simply a new sight or spectacle in its beautifully drawn and masterfully realized world. Hollow Knight has so much to offer in its experience that I could write several more pages on this game alone. From the surprisingly deep lore and the very well-written, fleshed-out characters, to the atmosphere and ambiance evoked from the richly drawn visuals and the absolutely incredibly composed, moving soundtrack, to the simple, well-designed gameplay that ramps up the skill ceiling until the final challenges of the game evolve into controller snapping tests of your skills and your patience. Everything about Hollow Knight is compelling, and I struggle real hard to find much to criticize about it. And even if I were to scrape together some paltry nitpicky complaints, it would be absolutely nothing compared to the monument of quality, thoughtful design, and dedication to the pinnacle of gaming experience that Hollow Knight has become. Team Cherry, the developer of Hollow Knight, have displayed nothing but passion, excellence, and a depth of creativity and skill in the making of this game that will ultimately enshrine it as one of, if not the best, 2D action platformers of all time. Now, if Silksong can just release before I die, I'll consider myself blessed. To say that Cyberpunk 2077 had a rough release would be perhaps one of the biggest understatements in gaming history. Cyberpunk 2077 on release was an absolute wreck of a game, a buggy and incomplete, shallow experience at best, and an utterly unplayable dumpster fire at worst. All of this coupled with a bevy of lies, gross exaggerations, and deceptive marketing by developers CDPR, and Cyberpunk 2077 quickly went from one of my most anticipated games of the year, possibly of all time, to an utter crushing disappointment. Giving credit where credit is due, 2 years later, CDPR have spent their time and resources since release on diligently fixing their botched game, correcting bugs, patching errors, adding features and additions until the Cyberpunk 2077 is a wholly different game. Don't get me wrong, Cyberpunk 2077 still has rough spots and flaws. Cyberpunk 2077 still swings fairly wildly between how stable the game is for some people even now, and that isn't without some concern. But I can only speak for my own personal experiences with Cyberpunk. I've encountered minimal glitches or bugs, and none of it was particularly impactful in any real meaningful way to my playthrough. Cyberpunk 2077 is a spectacle. There's depth to various parts of the game, be it in story, characters, or gameplay. Sometimes these elements are shallow and simplistic, sometimes they are plentifully deep and well developed. I've experienced everything during combat and gunplay, from guns that feel pathetically underpowered and weak to weapons with a full weight and punchiness that can be called nothing but deeply satisfying to use while rampaging through a crowd of cybernetically enhanced soldiers, blasting and shooting my way through, lobbing grenades and dashing from spot to spot as I cackle like a wild maniac. Skills, cybernetic augments, and a plethora of tiered guns keep the game steadily progressing and power scaling in a way that is satisfying and enjoyable. V at mid-game or late game feels nothing like your starting character, and the various upgrades you acquire, both through experience and skill trees and tangible body enhancements at a Ripperdoc, really change your approach and options in the game. Speaking of options, there's a fair depth of variety to builds and abilities that help you diversify your approach to missions and confrontations, allowing you to use stealth, hacking, bladed weapons, various types of gunplay, or even just going into every situation swinging for the fences with steel-plated fists. While not giving you as many options as an immersive sim game, you nonetheless can make a fair bit of choice in how you approach situations in Cyberpunk, if not quite so many choices in how you interact with characters and roleplay V in a social sense. Despite the lack of role-playing, characters and storylines in Cyberpunk are well developed and interesting, with a solid number of intriguing and surprising developments with various side quests and reoccurring characters that mesh well with the world building and lore of the grungy dystopian sci-fi setting. Perhaps the best part of Cyberpunk 2077 is Night City itself. I found myself often simply driving or walking around Night City, taking in the sights of the densely packed, detailed environments, the strange spectacle of the colossal mega buildings, the cramped, uncomfortable press of humanity jammed into too small a space, crowds surprisingly dense with various NPCs mulling about, the small shops too full with items and goods, the constant trash and cluttered refuse of the poor districts contrasting against the gleaming chrome and refined architecture of bright, vibrant neon of the luxurious districts of the wealthy elite and ambitious corpos. Always someone or someplace to experience and soak in, like a new pigment in the grand painting of what kind of horrible, beautiful place a city of the future will become. Cyberpunk is still not a perfect game. It is still not the game that CDPR promised us 2 years ago. But it is nonetheless a game worth playing. A game built on the back of a city as gorgeous and as vibrantly alive as it is crawling with dirt and death. I knew Metal Gear Rising as a bunch of memes before I ever experienced it as a game. Somehow, despite loving Metal Gear games by Platinum Studios, as well as general memery, Metal Gear Rising ended up flying under my radar for nearly a decade. And I am damn proud to say that I brought that unfortunate streak of not playing Metal Gear Rising to an end in 2022. Despite getting on in age, Metal Gear Rising is one of those games that withstand the test of time in every way, from visuals to writing to themes to gameplay and every other place in between, including the memes.
Nanomachines, son! Ugh! Making the mother of all omelets here, Jack. Can't fret over every egg.
It's a timeless classic of creative, original ideas, perfection in game design and pacing, and a borderline obsessive dedication to making every last moment of the game as badass and wildly over the top as possible. Metal Gear Rising is balls to the wall action and spectacle from start to finish. Near every moment of the game is packed full to bursting with cool, badass, wildly over the top moments, from the gameplay to the story to the ultra-quotable lines and memes.
Memes. The DNA of the soul.
The set pieces and boss battles, the stylish combos and moment-to-moment action, and a soundtrack that is so good that it's become a mainstay of gaming culture and has spawned memes all its own. Metal Gear Rising is intense, thrilling, and the kind of experience that will have you leaning forward in your seat and wildly thrashing through a string of combos and attacks, laughing aloud at the absurdity of many of the moments, or shaking your head at the quotes that are so memorable and nonsensical that they become stuck in your brain.
Don't fuck with this, Senator!
Above everything else, Metal Gear Rising doesn't give a fuck, and I love it for that more than I can say. It fully embraces its own cheese. It commits to being over the top to the extreme. It pushes its ridiculous plot and writing and the larger-than-life bombastic flair that it laces through every single stage and spectacle the game presents. It's one of the biggest tragedies in gaming that Metal Gear Rising went so thoroughly overlooked for so many years, and an absolute triumph that it has found a resurgence of interest recently. recently, born on the backs of memes, diehard fans, and an undeniable quality and commitment to its own feverish pace and energy that unfortunately the world just was not ready for until now. Have you ever wanted to play a game that simulates what it must be like to be a broken shell of a man? One plagued by alcoholism, loss, unprocessed trauma and grief, poor decision making, and some of the shittiest luck you could possibly imagine? What if I told you that's your off time between some of the most extreme moments of violence and chaos you've ever experienced? As hordes of armed mercenaries, soldiers, murderers, and the general worst humanity has to offer hunt you down, all of them doing their best to end your pathetic, miserable existence, and only your apparent ability to bend space-time and heal from bullet wounds with the magical power of booze and Percocet keeping you alive? If you answered yes to any of this, then for the love of God, you need some help. But as the possible next best thing, you should play Max Payne 3. Max Payne is a trilogy about a hard-boiled cop turned vigilante after suffering the loss of his family at the hands of drug dealers, and the series reaches all the way back to 2001 and the PlayStation 2 Xbox era, as well as obviously a PC release. The neo-noir cop-turned-loose canon in search of revenge series has long stood out for its commitment to both story and gameplay that blur the line between gritty realism and over-the-top stylized action. The first Max Payne was one of the originators of bullet time mechanics, slowing time and allowing the player to perform shooting feats and gameplay spectacles that went hand in hand with otherwise competent gameplay and thrilling action sequences as Max shot his way through an entire city's criminal underbelly. The newest iteration of Max Payne takes that formula and refines it to a gleaming, polished shine. It doesn't stray terribly far from what made its predecessors great, simply taking the action, the set pieces, the grim, gritty despair and pain and bullet wounds of Max's dark, depressing world of trauma and crime and revenge and amps it up to 12 or so. Max Payne 3 was released in 2012. After aging a decade before I finally got around to playing it, I'm honestly floored by just how good the visuals still are, both in terms of technical performance and fidelity and clarity of art design. Rockstar have always put out top-tier quality in pretty much everything they make, from practically every GTA to the legendary Red Dead games. Max Payne is no exception, and I can't help but feel like it doesn't get the recognition it deserves for being as good as it is, both in terms of visual presentation and gameplay. There are some rough edges to Max Payne 3, small little refinements to movement, animations, gameplay integrations that games of recent years have smoothed out, but none of these little snags are anywhere near severe enough to distract for even one moment from how thrilling the shootouts are, or the over-the-top set pieces, or the surprisingly engrossing setting and world building. Perhaps the best part of Max Payne 3 is Max himself. The intimate, uncomfortable look at Max and his personal demons, his alcoholism, his unresolved pain and trauma from his family's death now many years in the past. All these demons come together to slowly destroy him, one bottle and bullet at a time. This look at a destroyed man falling deeper and deeper into his own darkness is haunting in its frankness and honesty, even if it can at times get lost in all the over-the-top violence and the satisfying and darkly enjoyable thrill of slow-mo headshots and shotgun blasts to the chest. There's so much more to be said about Max Payne 3. I really consider it to be a high point of storytelling and a strong example of how video games can offer us the experience of walking a blood-soaked mile in the shoes of a character with real, flawed, ugly, all too human depth. I came to Max Payne 3 for the bullets and blood, but I'll remember it for the booze, the bottles, and the man who struggled with the depths of despair before finding a reason to claw his way out of his own darkness. Before we go to the final major game that I've been playing in 2022, let's go through a quick lightning round of honorable mentions, games that I played this year but I just don't really have time to cover as thoroughly here. Many of these I thoroughly enjoyed and I did make videos on, so look in the description below for the links to those videos if you want to see them in much more depth. And go! The Order 1886 was a crazy good looking game about werewolves and vampires that needed a lot more werewolves and vampires. Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the best superhero games to date and has one of the best gaming soundtracks of all time. And yes, I do mean of all time. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a crazy reimagining of one of the most influential RPGs ever made and adds a frankly confusing amount of crazy, weird, what the fuck is happening moments, and I'm here for it. Mad Max suffers from a lackluster open world, but more than makes up for it in its commitment to its source material and one of the most satisfying on-foot and in-vehicle combat systems I've played in a long time. Control takes the paranormal, creepy, not quite right, hiding in plain sight vibe and nails it on every front, drawing on a rich lore of Americana blended with the occult, mysticism, and a touch of cosmic horror. No Man's Sky is one of the greatest combat games of all time, starting out as a completely disappointing, underperforming flop and evolving into a richly expanded and redesigned game that offers a near infinite amount of sights and vistas to explore in the infinitely generated expanse of space. Binding of Isaac is a game I've played for years, but this year I picked up the all-new Repentance expansion and started playing the new co-op mode with my wife. Isaac is foul and gross, and we love every disgusting moment together. The Ascent is a dystopian cyberpunk, future tech, isometric multiplayer, shoot-em-up, role-playing, looter-shooter, Diablo-esque party that expands across too many genres, yet somehow works in every one of them. Proving a jack-of-all-trades approach to a game really can work as long as the right amount of quality is given to each element. Returnal is the best case for a AAA story-rich roguelike, and I haven't finished it yet, but the game is an absolute banger and deserves way more love than it gets, so I'll probably make a video on it soon, so stay tuned. I play Nobody Saves the World with my kiddo. He loves the simple but colorful world and the goofy characters and writing and the straightforward bash the waves of baddies gameplay loop, and I like the surprising depth of options and how to approach battles. Nobody Saves the World is simple but satisfying at its best. Played Stalker for a bit at the hounding of several community members, and while it's dated as hell, I can see the appeal in the desolate and harsh Russian wasteland where strange anomalies happen outside your control or understanding. I enjoyed my time with Stalker until a door shut and locked, keeping me from accessing Story Central NPCs, and I gave up the ghost. I'll get back to this one day. The Surge 1 and 2 are Souls-like games with similar mechanics and borrowed concepts from Dark Souls, but with exosuits and mechanical menaces instead of swords and sorcery and dragons. The Surge 2 is far from a perfect game, but is actually enjoyable to play with some solid gameplay and character customization options. The Surge 1 is trash. Yeah, I said it. Ratchet & Clank Rifts Apart is the latest iteration in a long-running series of high-quality Pixar-esque action-adventure gunner games, and it has more particle effects on screen at any given moment than the rest of the series combined. Apex Legends isn't a new game for me in 2022, but I played plenty of it this year, and it's my competitive multiplayer comfort game of choice, so I keep going back to the game even though I'm as bad as ever. Worse even. I'm getting worse at the game, and I didn't think that was possible. But it's fine because I've touched more vagina than you, including your mom's. Finally, let's talk about the last game I played in 2022. One of, if not the most anticipated titties? I actually wrote titties there. One of, if not the most anticipated titles of the whole year. I'm of course talking about the big bearded daddy of games. God of War Ragnarok is the must-play game of the year about bearded dads who also happen to be demigods with an above-average proficiency for murdering mythological creatures. It's also just, you know, an incredibly well-made, engaging, enjoyable-to-play game in general. God of War is a fantastic series, be it the original Greek trilogy of yesteryears, the drastic but ultimately meaningful changes of God of War 2018, or now Ragnarok, which is God of War 2018 but even more, even better, making Ragnarok feel like the second act of the same grand play as 2018, and that's perfect. But while Ragnarok knew that God of War wasn't broken, so there was really no need to fix it, that doesn't mean that there was no room for any improvements. Ragnarok approaches these as small tweaks and refined changes, generally small adjustments that are almost imperceptible but do make a difference. Changes in the form of new or adjusted combat mechanics or a way of navigating the world, or subtle shifts in characters and their interpersonal connections and conflicts. All of these things are small but meaningful and evocative of God of War 2018 in a way that continues the same momentum and the same themes. They're just enough to occasionally be noticed, but never enough to be intrusive. And everywhere they're made, Ragnarok is better for them. There's so much about the clear labor of love that went into Ragnarok that makes the game shine as one of the very best games of the year, not the least of which is the expanded cast of characters that serve to reinforce and enrich the already established favorites who make a return appearance and further their intertwining narratives and evolving story arcs. These various narrative threads, the way they break new ground while also having many callbacks and references to the previous games, the refreshing but faithful to 2018 battle, exploration, and set-piece moment keep the gameplay engaging and fun as we explore the 9 realms. During the journey, Kratos, Atreus, and their companions explore familiar places transformed by the presence of Fimbulwinter, the icy precursor to Ragnarok. We likewise get to visit new realms and new areas that are as brilliantly realized and fleshed out with life and detail as 2018 was, and more. More than anything, the defining characteristic of Ragnarok is its characters and performances. There are so many iconic scenes where the various actors deliver deeply emotive, evocative performances, both in the voice acting and motion capture, and the detail poured into body language and facial expressions. The nuance on display is so high level that many a scene, particularly with Kratos himself, conveys a wealth of feelings, emotion, and weight without a single word being spoken. There's many games out now that shows that performances in games now rival the performances found in the most evocative and well-acted scenes in cinema. God of War Ragnarok holds a high-ranking place in the pantheons of best-acted games to date, with almost all of the key characters and actors delivering moving, emotional, and thought-provoking performances. In a game that just nails it in almost every area, from visuals and story to gameplay, art design and writing, environmental design and musical scoring, the voice and motion capture performances are a vibrant feather in an all-around amazingly crafted cap. In a year full of gaming juggernauts, Ragnarok is an unquestionable must-play. Also, because I'm shamelessly desperate for your precious watch hours and validation, if you want a more thorough look at my initial impressions of God of War Ragnarok, you can check out my video that's linked up in one of the corners or in the description below. I do the whole video in a Wish.com cosplay of Kratos, so there's some extra incentive for those of you that are looking for a train wreck. I'll have more videos with discussion about Ragnarok coming up in the near future now that I've finally finished the game. 2022 turned out to be a great year for me in terms of gaming, as I got the opportunity to play a lot of great new release titles this year, as well as a bunch of games released in yesteryear that I never really got around to playing. From decades-old classics to truly groundbreaking new titles, I got to explore many games that I won't forget anytime soon, and almost every game on the list, even the ones that weren't at the top of the heap, I would recommend people at least give a try. Which of these games have you played? Which of them are your favorites? Which games are must-plays that I didn't get around to this year and I have to add to my list for 2023? Which games did you play during 2022 that you're most excited to share and talk about? Leave a comment and let me know, and maybe I'll find a couple of gems that I can add to the 2023 list. 2023 looms ahead of us, and I have many games on my list that I'm already itching to play. I'm looking at you, Dead Space, Callisto Protocol, and Atomic Heart. All I know is if 2023 lets me get to even half of the amazing games that I got to experience during 2022, then it's gonna be a banger of a year ahead.